This is a download from Newstalk 106 to 108. To download other programmes or for more information, go to newstalk.ie.
Now, there have been theories that certain technologies we now use were given to us by aliens, but what about other abilities such as psychic powers? Stewart Swerdlow's story was turned into a movie last year called The Montauk Chronicles. Stewart himself has written a book called Montauk, The Alien Connection. Stewart is on the line to us now. Good afternoon, Stewart.
Hello, how are you?
Not too bad. Thanks very much for talking to us today. Could you start by telling us a bit about the circumstances of your birth?
Well, yes, and that's a very long, complicated story, but basically when my mother was ready to give birth to me, she was taken to the wing of a hospital that was not yet open. In fact, there was no heat in the building, and she was told that it was impossible for her to have become pregnant because she had no birth canal. And so they actually had to perform surgery on her in the hospital in her labor to create the birth canal and allow me to be born, and that is actually written up in some medical books.
Right. And where was this hospital?
This was in New York City.
And did you have a father?
Yes, I do. Well, I guess it's a matter of opinion, isn't it? But yes, I do have.
No, but because I understood that you think you were actually a result of IVF.
Well, yes, and I was told that there was a mixture, and even back in those days, they did do genetic manipulation. And my father's family, in fact, my ancestry is that my great-uncle was the first president of the Soviet Union, and so my family was very heavily monitored in Western Europe as well as North America.
Right. Who was your great-uncle?
Yakov Sverdlov.
Right.
And the city of Sverdlovsk was named after him. He ordered the assassination of the Tsar and their family in Yekaterinburg in the Ural Mountains, and of course, to honor that, they renamed the city Sverdlovsk.
And you feel that because of that, your family had been monitored in the United States anyway?
Yes, and still goes on to this day. Mail is open, phones are tapped, etc. It's an ongoing thing.
So, when you were a child, was your upbringing fairly irregular upbringing?
Well, I always say I never had a real childhood because I always felt like I was an adult from the time I could remember. I never had a normal childhood playing and things like this. I was tested very brutally by medical professionals. I was taken to dentistry where I was given needles and work without anesthesia. It's a very, very brutal story which I wrote about in the book you mentioned.
Yeah, and so where was all this going on?
Well, this occurred in various parts of North America, particularly in New York, but also occurred in Quebec, where I spent also time as a child, and in Florida and in other locations.
But were your parents doing this, Stewart, to you, or were there other people controlling your life at that point?
Well, both. My parents took me to these people where these things were performed, and then I was also taken separately without them being present.
And was it ever explained to you when you were brought to these people why they were doing these things to you?
When I was a small child, no, it was not explained to me. However, as I became a teenager and became involved in the Montauk Project, which was from 1970 to 1983, there we and all of us who were in that project were indoctrinated and told that this was a very vast experiment to create individuals who can see into other realities without the use of a device, and actually we become the device. And we were also told that humanity was incapable of taking care of itself, and so the government and those in charge of it were creating mind control programming in order to make the population acquiesce to all the rules and regulations.
So would it be fair to say that you and the others who were in the Montauk Project had been sort of schooled for quite some time? People had been keeping an eye on these group of people, presumably because they felt you had some sort of gift?
They basically took people who had a certain kind of genetics that they were looking for. And these genetics enable more mind control and programming, and so that was desirable. In the beginning, they did test on those who were considered to be expendable, derelicts, orphan children, foster children, drug addicts, people that nobody would miss. And when they became a bit proficient at it, then they tested it on others, usually the children of government officials, military, etc., which I was. And also, they were able to download some of the broadcasts that they would create, and then by satellite transmission, beam that across the world.
Were your parents aware of this?
You know, interesting question, because I at first they said no, and when I confronted them several times, finally they broke down and they said that yes, they did take me, but it wasn't as often as I thought it was. But still, I confronted them, and even when I had medical tests done on me, I have X-rays that shows metal artifacts in my body. My dentist has told me that I had unnecessary work done on my teeth, so I do have physical evidence and proof that these things were physically done to me.
And so, in terms of developing these particular talents within you, was it a situation where at some point you were introduced to alien forms of existence?
Well, yes, that did happen at Montauk Project, but I do want to clarify that much of what happened there was by the government, not by aliens, although they did use alien technology.
Right, and what sort of alien technology did they mostly use?
There were devices, for example, I write about it in the book, one of the books that I wrote, the Montauk chair, where they can transmit electromagnetic energies into the brain, fracturing it, creating compartments in the personality that can be programmed. They can enhance physical and mental abilities, open genetics that are locked up. There's a vast array of abilities that they learned about back in the 70s and 80s, which they now are perpetrating on the public in a general manner. And they can do this by satellite transmission, cell phone tower, and radio wave, etc.
And give us an example, if you could, Stewart, of what kind of things they're doing now to people.
Well, for example, there's mind control waves that are transmitted. Your brain transmit electromagnetic energies that look like a sine wave. And what they do is they are able to download or translate every word in every language into a frequency. They can translate, send that to piggyback your brainwave, sending you instructions into your mind, which you feel are your own thoughts because it feels like your own thought, and then you act out whatever that function is, and that's called triggering or activating into a programming function.
Right.
We see this happen with the so-called terrorist cells. We see this happen with serial killers. We see this happen with snipers, vigilantes, etc. These are all part of vast mind control experiments performed by the government.
Do they just do this to individuals, or could they make, say, an entire population?
Oh, an entire population. Actually, that's
because, like, we all bought houses 10 years ago that were, for twice what they were worth, and we all went nuts for 10 years, and you'd wonder.
Well, it's interesting because just before I came on, I heard you mentioning about the gunrunning in Ireland, and there's a lot more to that story than perhaps is known by the public. It involves the Mossad, it involves the NSA, it involves even KGB. Ireland became a focal point for the New World Order because it was kind of not acquiescing to what the rest of the Europeans and North Americans wanted. So they punished Ireland by creating that situation. And so now Ireland is now swept up into the EU and suffering the consequences of that.
During what period, Stuart, were we not acquiescing?
Well, during the 50s, 60s, and 70s, basically there was an agenda to create a European superstate, which is basically in creation now and on its way. And those countries that did not go along with the program, so to speak, were punished, like Ireland, like Serbia and Croatia, like Bosnia-Herzegovina. All of these countries have problems because they didn't go along with the program, so to speak. And same thing happening with Iceland, where they punished it economically to destroy its currency so that it has to be swept up into the EU to survive.
So these people are thinking very much in long term. Then, you know, if we're not playing ball in the 1970s, we get punished for that 40 years later.
Well, it's an ongoing process, and it's not just Ireland, it's a global. They're trying to create a one-world government, which in effect they really do have, and they do this by creating staged events like 9/11, like an upcoming staged alien invasion, which I think may have its premiere at the London Olympics, because the whole world will be watching the one site.
Okay.
And it's very curious that they have these ground-to-air missiles on private residences in the area. What are they expecting to come from the sky?
That is lots of people have asked similar questions to that. Who is the one world government?
Well, again, it is what I call the Illuminati, or the 13 ruling families that control most of the resources of the planet. I write about this in my book, Blue Blood, True Blood. And their agenda is the globalization of the planet. So there's one government, one religion. Everyone has a programmed function with no deviation, and basically we're like a robot society that continues on without question.
What's the one religion everybody has to follow?
Well, that's what's in creation now, and it will have to do with Princess Diana as the female icon of that religion, and they will also create a staged second coming of Christ, who will proclaim the New World Order as his new holy empire. It's all a setup. It's all not real, but people will believe it. And they also have technology called Blue Beam Project, which can project holographic images into the sky so that people think that there's an alien fleet in the atmosphere, or that the face of Christ is out there. This technology is old. It was tested in 1961 in Havana Harbor when a U.S. submarine surfaced and projected the image of the Blessed Virgin Mary over Havana Harbor, so that the communist society would think that the Holy Mother had come to convert them back to religion. I
read about that before. Actually, there was when they were coming up with these, the CIA were coming up with these crazy ideas to try and depose Castro. Because I think there was one about they were going to have Jesus on what they claimed would be Jesus on a kind of an aircraft carrier, and then the Cubans would all spontaneously rise up against Castro, which obviously didn't happen. And these 13 families, though, why do they want to control the world? Why do they think it's a good idea? It's
part of their mind pattern, their belief system. They trace their ancestry back to ancient Sumer and Babylon. They have what is called a reptilian religion. You can read about that in David Icke's work, which is all true and correct. And I also write about that in my work. And their agenda is they believe that they are the rulers of the world and they are superior, and that the rest of humanity needs to be enslaved. And is not as intelligent as they are. And so that's just their belief system.
And are they doing this with the compliance of governments around the world?
They created the governments around the world, so the governments answer to them, and so they pull the strings. They don't recognize borders as we do. To them, the whole world belongs to them. They divvy up nationalities for the purpose of control, but in the end, it all goes back to one source.
Where do these people live?
All over. They live all over. Of course, in Europe, the main headquarters are in London and in Paris. But, you know, the families fight amongst themselves.
Yeah.
One of the families that's now coming back into its power is the Romanovs in Russia. And that's why we're seeing the Russians become so brazen again. And I do say, and I mentioned this on Finnish television last year, that the Soviet Union is coming back and it is reconstituting, and we're seeing that happen even now. And so the benefit of this is that as these families fight amongst themselves, it opens up little cracks in the system that we can widen and empower ourselves. And well, the work that I teach is to do release work from the mind pattern, remove the victimization, do your deprogramming work, and when you retain your full core personality, nobody can control you again. And then we as individuals and as a species can then become what we're supposed to be.
Stewart, I do have to take a commercial break, but we haven't really got to the rest of your story. Would you mind staying with us for another few minutes, just while we take a quick commercial break?
Of course.
Okay, thank you very much, Stewart. Back in a couple of minutes. We have been talking to Stewart Swerdlow, who's the author of many books, including one called Montauk, The Alien Connection, which is about many of his own experiences. Now, Stewart was telling us, outlining for us a rather frightening scenario of a one-world government and perhaps a degree of mind control that we're being told what to do. Stewart, I would like to go back to kind of your own story, though, a bit, because you were a teenager. You were, well, I suppose you weren't recruited. You were probably, it wasn't of your own volition that you ended up in Montauk. Could you have left it if you wanted to?
No, it wasn't so easy to do so. In fact, I guess you can consider it fortunate. In August 12th of 1983, the project crashed abruptly. And that's when those of us who were still alive in the project kind of were released from that agenda, but the imprinting stayed, and it became very difficult to survive in normal world because, quite honestly, I wasn't used to surviving in a normal conventional society. And so I spent many years after that deprogramming and speaking out against the government. And as I did so, I was punished, and I was placed in prison by the government and basically told if I keep my mouth shut, they'd let me out. Otherwise, it would be worse. And so I did play the game for a bit of time until I was released. And now I spend my life helping other people get out of these situations, deprogramming, releasing mind patterns, etc.
And could you tell us, Stewart, precisely what was it that they were using your brain to do?
They try to create a person to see into other realities without the use of a device, what they call hyperspace activity. And my job was to go look at the color, archetype symbol, and tones that exist in what is considered to be God, mind, energy, or hyperspace level, so that they could take those formulas or the information that would be discovered and then turn them into software that they could then use to control people and create situations. Now, you know, it's a two-edged sword because energy is energy. You can use it for positive or negative. The energy itself is neutral. What it did to me, unfortunately, for 29 years of my life, I became physically blind. I could not see physical reality. I could only see energetically through the mind, using the 90% of the brain that isn't used, and part of the 97% of the DNA that isn't used. And that's
so is this a bit like, I'm sorry to draw this analogy, but you know, like in the Matrix, that the guy can read the code, you were reading the code that the rest of us don't see?
I was reading the archetype symbol that exists in the energetic levels. Yes, absolutely. Unfortunately, they took that information and used it against people. What I am doing in my work is teaching people this information that they can use it for themselves and free themselves from this the agenda that exists. But it did damage to my body. I had ulcerative colitis, bleed internally for many, many years. I had many issues as a result of this, which I have corrected subsequently.
In your time in Montauk, how many species of alien did you encounter?
There were quite a few. Different ones. However, the main ones that I witnessed personally were the reptilians, who claim to be the ancestors of all of humanity. I also met the so-called little grays of various types, and there are many different versions of that. And there were also the beings from Sirius A, from who the government received the best technology. And the Montauk chair was Sirius A technology. And there are many governments across the world that do have connections to these beings.
Atlantis was a real place. Who lived there?
Well, the Atlanteans were actually... Atlantis was colonized by refugees from the Lyrian star system. For all intents and purposes, that was the home world of all of humanity in this galaxy. And that star system was attacked by reptilian species that caused the dispersion of humanity to other parts of the galaxy, including this particular solar system. And it's an extremely long story, but I do write about it in my Blue Blood Troop blood history, as well as the DVDs I have on True World History.
Stewart, though, while you were telling us before about the Illuminati and these 13 families, would any of these aliens not think, well, we should try and let humans choose their own fate and not be ruled by 13 families?
Well, that kind of is a New Age concept. And the New Age was actually created by U.S. government in 1965 in order to set the foundation for New World religion and New World government. It's kind of an airy-fairy way of looking at things, love, light, and peace, which is the opposite of what really exists. And the benevolent beings don't interfere. They don't come here because they know that we won't learn our lessons. It's only the ones with an agenda that come here to interfere.
And what do they want?
Control. Those who it's like a carjacking almost. Those who come here, they're looking for something. They want material, they want genetics, they want something from the Earth and from humanity. And we exist in this part of the galaxy, in the Milky Way galaxy, which is shaped like a pinwheel, if you can imagine that. Our solar system exists on one of the points of the pinwheel. So that if you were an invasion force trying to occupy a galaxy like this, the most logical thing you could do is to occupy all the points on the pinwheel, and then in effect you have surrounded the galaxy and you can take your time working your way in. And that's basically what's going on here in the Milky Way.
So are we an outpost? Are we at the... well, of course, we're on the pinwheel, so we're kind of at the start of this invasion.
Well, it's been going on for many, many millennia, and there was no life native to this planet. Life was brought here and created here. And we are actually, humanity in its current form is a synthesis of the original Lyrian humans mixed with the reptilians. And that's why we have genetic factors in our bodies. We're not supposed to be like that. We are actually hybrids. And the two species that we are derived from, one looks reptilian, as you say. What does the other one look like? Well, human, very human. The original human shape was very tall, fair-haired, fair-skinned, and that's the original human form, and everything else has been modified since then. And, you can look at the proof in the way humans are created or gestate in the womb. For the first few weeks of life, we are androgynous reptilian.
That's true.
And only afterwards do mammalian differentiations occur as well as gender.
Yeah, you did mention, Stewart, that you do a lot of work trying to help people from the mind control. Are you optimistic about the future? Because it sounds like we're outnumbered and outgunned pretty much.
Well, it looks that way on the surface, but it's the other way around. The Illuminati are only a few 100,000 in number, and we, the rest of humanity, are over 7 billion.
What about all the aliens, though?
Oh, you know what? We are aliens on this planet, so we are the alien within ourselves. We must take our own power back. We must regain the use of our own minds and genetics and be in who and what we are spiritually, and not allow the control systems to overtake us. And that's what my goal is, to teach people how to do that.
Stewart, thank you very much for speaking with us today. That was Stewart Swerdlow there. We'll be back with the news.
Thanks for listening to this Newstalk 106 to 108 podcast. To download other programmes or for more information, go to newstalk.ie.